Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Hello to everyone who may be here looking at this this video of mine that I'm about to make. Before I begin, though, I hope everyone is in good health and and good iman or faith. And I want to say that I had actually started to do these Islamic videos, and unfortunately I sort of tapered off because I moved from one city to the next and sort of gotten some time to get back on my feet. And I just wanted to pick up where I left off. For those of you who may not have seen the previous videos, there was just an introduction about myself and my belief in Islam and my being a Muslim. And to make a long story short, I wanted to share with people the Islam that I know and that I've come to understand through my learning and my studies, and in the hopes that it's beneficial. I won't say too much on that. I'm just going to try to do the videos and to bring you the information that I think is relevant, because in this day and age there is so much presentation about what Islam is. Some of it is accurate, others of it is not so. And God willing, inshallah, I hope that what I share with you guys is of some benefit and is accurate as much as possible, but more importantly, that it's beneficial. One of the things I want to say before I do begin is I want to say I'm not sharing this information with the attempt or with the intention to convince anybody of anything. If you're not someone who doesn't believe in God or a higher power, or however you want to describe that, these videos can still be beneficial, because they deal with the human condition to understand why it is that we are here. And perhaps in listening, you might find something in that for you that resonates with you. You may be someone who fears Allah or fears God. Allah, of course, is just a word that means God. It's an Arabic word that means God. But you might be someone who doesn't even realize that you actually fear God. And this is actually one of the qualities of someone who eventually comes to believe in God. God says, the only thing you can do for human beings is just share with them the message. And God says that in the Quran, God says that those who fear Him will listen. He doesn't give you any, in the Quran, He doesn't give you any other type of, any other type of reasons why someone would believe. And of course, other than sharing with people what it is that God has done, and we will get into that as well. And when we understand the works of the Creator, we come to see, oh yeah, jeez, like no one else did that. Like no human hands or ingenuity has ever done that. And that's another way of also recognizing God in the creation. But really and truly, God says in the Quran that just tell them what the message is, just reveal it to them, and whoever will believe based on this fear. And we will talk about that as well as we continue to divulge these videos. Today, though, I want to say one thing before I really begin. and that is, I asked myself, what is the most important way to start these videos? And I came to understand that in the media today, Islam is very much vilified and misrepresented, and I'm sure even this is becoming like a cliche to a lot of people, especially non-Muslims, because they're probably like, okay, what is it then? What is it? And so I'm trying now in sharing these videos with you to dispel and erase and invite you to something that I consider to be Islamically appropriate. And what I'll try to do is, well, when I thought about, okay, what is that? What is the Islamically appropriate thing? I couldn't help but think about the stories and the stories that is found in the Quran. And these stories, when we listen to them and we read them, we get the best of what Islam really is. And human beings have a very funny way of learning. We learn actually best from storytelling. And so I wanted to go back to this ancient art of learning, right? Before there were books, before there was the written word, people would sit around and tell stories. And they would recount the history of their people or certain personalities within their community, village, etc. And they would tell these stories as a way of retaining the historic memory of their people. And that was one of the ways in which human beings learned, through storytelling. Which is why you find in the Quran, you have a multitude of these stories that in them are embedded certain spiritual realities and truths. And it's not loaded, it's not trying to download all this information on you. It's just giving you a little bit of information here and there to guide you and to show us. And I wanted to share with you these stories, and to show you the Islam in and through them, and how Islam wishes to represent itself in the best of the best personalities of Islam, which are, for those of you who are Muslims know, are the prophets and messengers. These are the best example of what it is to be Muslim. And oftentimes non-Muslims, Christian or even believers like Christians and Jews, they have partial or bits or snippets of these stories, but not as in detail as we have them in the Quran. And even also they diverge at some points to reveal other things that may not be found in the Bible and in the Torah. So, if you are Christian or you're Jewish and you know the stories, listen to them, because they are very different. They're a little bit different in Islam, and they reveal different things at certain points where they diverge. So without further ado, let me begin. One of the stories I want to talk about today or share with you today is the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. In the Christian Bible, he is a prophet, same thing as in Islam, and his name is Joseph. So in this story, from time to time, I'll use both names, but it's to refer to the same person. And there are many lessons in his story. What's interesting in the Quran, God says when he's about to tell the story, he says that in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, and for those of you who are not familiar with alayhi salam, it's just an Arabic phrase that is whenever we mention someone who is a prophet or imam. I'll later on explain what an imam is. These are basically perfectly guided personalities within Islam, be they prophets or the descendants of prophets, the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad himself, imams. And we say alayhi salam as a way of sending, or it's a phrase that sends peace and blessings upon them. It's a term of respect and endearment and veneration. So you'll hear me say that from time to time, but that's basically what that means. So God says that, in his story there are signs for seekers of truth. And in other words, that if you want to know the truth about things, about the reality of spiritual things, listen to his story. And when I say story, I don't mean this is some kind of fable. No, this is something that actually happened. This is someone's life God is recounting to us. And this is why I say I'm not trying to if you're not someone who believes in religion or God or anything like that, and you stumble onto this video, I'm not going to try to convince you of anything. It is the belief that every story that has been demonstrated in the text of Islam is an actual event, a historical event. We believe it to be such, even ones that are miraculous. And we will even talk about miracles and all those things, and try to put those things into context. But this is an actual story of someone's life. And this is the story of the life of God's prophet. And God says that if you want to learn something about the truth of myself, of my prophets, and life, this is the story. Read the story and you'll find out about that. So this is where we're headed. The context for this story is that Yusuf al-Islam was a young man, and he was not yet a prophet. He would become a prophet at some point, but he's a very young man, and his father loves him very dearly, and he has other stepbrothers, and he has there's about, I think, 9 or 10 of them. And then he has another brother that is his actual biological full brother, and his name is Benjamin. And then he has other stepbrothers of the same father but of a different mother. And at some point, jealousy creeps in the relationship between the brothers and the father, and he it becomes such an issue that they decide that they don't really like Yusuf al-Islam. But in any event, one day Yusuf al-Islam comes to his father Jacob, who is himself a prophet of God. And Jacob, comes from the line of Abraham. So from Abraham, who is he's like the father of Islam, if you want to You want to give him a title, or even better yet, he's the friend of God. Or what? You're the friend of God, like, yo. He's like, he's high status. Not only is he himself a prophet, Abraham, but he's been titled in Islamic literature, or in Islam, he is the friend of the Creator. That's man. So from Abraham's line comes Ishmael and Isaac, and then Jacob. And from Jacob that comes Yusuf al-Islam. And so one day Yusuf al-Islam turns to Jacob and he says, "Oh my father, I did see 11 stars. And the sun and the moon, I saw them prostrate themselves to me." So he's telling his father, in a dream I saw this. I saw that, these planets, these stars, and the sun and moon, they're like prostrating to me. And the father immediately understands what it is, what that vision means. He has the power to interpret that. This was Jacob's ability. And he says, "My dear son, relate not this vision to thy brothers, lest they concoct a plot against thee, for Shaitan, or the English term Satan, is an avowed enemy." And so he goes on to say what will happen. He says, "Thus will thy Lord choose thee and teach thee the interpretation of stories and events, and perfect his favor to thee and to the posterity of Jacob al-Islam, even as he perfected it to thy fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac aforetime." So his father already knows what's about to happen, and Yusuf al-Islam is treasured among other things. I mean, he's just a beautiful child. Not only beautiful physically, but he's beautiful in his personality, in his demeanor, everything about him. And so I'm sure when he told his father was like, his father must be incredibly pleased, because now he has the confirmation that his son will be chosen. This one will be chosen for the prophethood. That God will give this one his message for humanity. And someone who is chosen for the message of God for humanity, that's not someone you take lightly. And so his father just loved him. But the brothers didn't understand, like, where is this affection coming from? And so they said to themselves, "Truly Joseph and his brother Benjamin are loved more by our father than we." He says, but we are a goodly body. We're able, we're strong. Really, our father is obviously in error. But when the jealousy became so thick and they couldn't stand it anymore, they said, they consulted amongst them. They had a secret meeting and consulted among themselves, and they said, slay ye or Joseph, or cast him out to some unknown land, that so the favor of your father may be given to you alone. There may be time enough for you to be righteous after that. And this is the quality and God wishes to show us in this story the quality of these people, of these brothers, like the quality of their soul. First, they don't understand, and it's weird that, like, if there was anyone that should understand the message of God, it would be them, because they are the sons of a prophet, right? They can ask him anything. They can have the richest understanding of faith and God, but here it is that they're so enwrapped in their jealousy that they're planning to kill the son of a prophet, their own father's son. And the rationale, it's so ludicrous, because they say, well, we can kill him, and then after that there's still time to be righteous, as if to say that that deed will be forgotten and they would be clean after that. What? This is not what? That's not religion. That's not faith. That is the highest form of hypocrisy. So I can only imagine God be like, what? Like, you're gonna do what? Yo, I'm planning something for you guys. And so indeed God did. I said, what? God saw the shaitan, like, what? Planning on doing what? With what? My prophet? What? Yo, you guys don't even know. And throughout the story, God keeps telling us that we had control of Yusuf's story and Yusuf's life. We had control of that. Like, people don't even realize we had control of his life. In other words, that God would be there to protect him and to bless him in ways that you couldn't have imagined it. And so they said, the brothers, they came to the father, they say, "Our father, why dost thou not trust us with Yusuf alayhi salam?" So you can tell already the stage of the relationship between the father and these kids, because he already tells Yusuf alayhi salam, hey, don't mention this to your brothers, because he's already keenly aware that there's jealousy there, and he understands the nature of jealousy. He says, don't tell them this. This is not something that they're going to respond very favorably to. Like, what? God has chosen this guy on top of this guy? We already hate this guy. We don't need to hear this. So, and here it is that they're saying, admitting, why is it you don't trust us with Yusuf alayhi salam? So he's already aware that there's something, there's something brewing. Seeing that we are indeed his sincere well-wishers, like we sincerely care about him. So they said, send him with us tomorrow to enjoy himself and play, and we shall take every care of him. And the Prophet Jacob said, he says, really, it saddens me that you should take him away. I fear lest the wolf should devour him while ye attend not to him. They said, well, if the wolf were to devour him while we are so large a party, then should we indeed first have perished ourselves. Right? So in other words, they're saying, like, well, if the wolf gets him, well, they would have to get us first, and we are so large a body that why, that would never happen. Well, that's a pretty convincing argument. It's, of course, yeah, like he's not irrational. The Prophet understood, yeah, of course, So, taking them on their word, the Quran says, so they did take him away, and they all agreed to throw him down the bottom of a well. And, that was the plot. They had initially, after considering killing him, they said, well, no, just throw him in a well, and from there he can just disappear. And when he got into the well, when they threw him into the well, God says in the Quran that we put this message into his heart. We said, of a surety, thou shalt one day tell them the truth of their affair, while they know thee not. So immediately God responded and said, no, don't worry. Don't worry. Wait, one of these days, you're going to tell them about this story when they don't recognize you. Because he's only 18 at this point. And they are actually grown men. They're big men. They're fully grown. They're in their manhood. So God says in the Quran, then they came to their father in the early part of the night weeping. They said, "O our father, we went racing with one another and left Joseph with our things, and the wolf devoured him. But thou will never believe us, even though we tell the truth." And what's interesting here is that it shows like how unimaginative they are. I mean, this was the very thing their father was telling them would happen. So they came back and told him exactly what, as an excuse. You know, the very thing that he was telling them to be precautious about, they came back and told him as an excuse. This is how callous, and they didn't really care to give him some really plausible excuse, because he had told them, just watch out for that. This is how callous they were. These are his sons. This is how the jealousy was. And in the Quran, God talks about jealousy elsewhere, and this is the vileness of jealousy. Jealousy would lead you to kill somebody and make you feel comfortable that what you have done is okay. This is how deep the vileness of jealousy is. And it's something to be, as a person who is spiritual, Allah wishes to remind people that you have to guard your heart from jealousy. It's a dangerous sentiment, a dangerous feeling that it's not something that you want to entertain in your heart. It can lead to your spiritual degradation and even destruction. And we will see in another story how jealousy caused the destruction of another person in the eyes of God. And they nearly reached the rim of the pit of hellfire. They nearly reached it. They did, because they didn't actually kill him. But had they done that, it would have been over for them. But that's a side note. We'll get to that in other stories. So Jacob al-Islam, he says, "Nay, but your minds have made up a tale that will pass with you. For me, patience is most fitting against that which ye assert. It is Allah alone whose help can be sought." He didn't fly into a rage. He didn't try to beat them. No, he said no. Because he knew Allah had already informed him through the vision of his son that this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm going to do. And his faith was strong in God. And for those of you who don't know, but Jacob al-Islam happens to be blind. He was blinded. He lost his eyesight. He lost his eyesight at some point. And he said, "Nah, Nah, buddy. But this is an excuse you've concocted, and it seems okay to you to present this type of thing. But he says, no, for me, patience is most fitting. And this is why in the teachings of Islam, God always says that I love those who are patient. This is why patience is known as a virtue. So in the relationship between God and his servant, his creatures, God always says patience is the most important thing, among other things. In fact, it's so important that in Islamic hadiths, and of course hadith means the sayings or the actions presented to us of the Prophet himself, what he said and what he did, or of his offspring who are considered imams. And we will get in more about the imams and the Prophet later on. The Prophet said that patience is to faith what the head is to the body. That if a person does not have patience in life as it relates to God and how God is directing his life or her life, that you won't be able to reach the levels of faith that is required in your relationship with the Creator. And this is why the Prophet himself said, no, patience is more fitting for me. Because he understands that this is a test. This is something. This is not what it is. This is something else. And we will wait to see what Allah or what God wishes to manifest. And he says, and what he also says, it is Allah alone whose help can be sought. So another attribute of patience or faith is to rely solely on God. This is why God says, if you want to know the truth of how to be as a servant, listen to this story. I'll teach you how to be. And so we see in the character of the Prophet Jacob, we see that he's saying, no, only Allah can I rely on. Just can't rely on anybody else. Don't worry. And he's teaching us that. So that also is another one of the virtues within the religion. And I will try to remember to read you a hadith that encapsulates this idea of only believing and trusting and depending on God alone, which is one of the pivotal lessons of this story. But anyways, we will save that for later. So what happens now is he's in the well, and a caravan comes by and stations there, and they send their water boy to collect some water from the well. And when he threw down the bucket, Yusuf was there. And this is how Yusuf became saved and was taken out of the well. But what happened was they took him as their property. They enslaved him, so to speak. And then they took him to Egypt and they sold him as a slave. In fact, the Quran says that they sold him for a few dirhams, or a few counted out gold coins. Like it was the price, what he was worth to that society, what he was sold for and what he was worth. It was a miserable price for what he's worth. And God took the time in the Quran to say, and they sold him for a miserable price, a few dirhams, counted out. The Quran says, in such low estimation did they hold him. What? God's prophet? Do you know who that is? Someone who can tell you anything about the hereafter? Anything about God? Anything you wanted to know, he can tell you, he can teach you, he can show you. And isn't that what all of human science is directed towards? Trying to unveil the mystery of life. Why are we here? What are we doing? Where are we going? What do we need to know before we get there? How are we to be in the here and now? He can tell you everything. And God says, a few coins they sold him for. What? But in any event, so what happened was, he was bought by this noble Egyptian person. He was like, I think he was the governor of the society. So he was part of the nobility class. And this man, in folklore, he's known, I think, as Potiphar, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, Potiphar. And his wife was a young and beautiful woman. Her name was Zuleika. So he says to his wife after he bought Yusuf al-Islam, he says, make his stay among us honorable. Maybe he will bring us much good, or we shall adopt him as a son. And the Quran says, thus did we establish Joseph in the land, that we might teach him the interpretation of stories and events, and Allah hath full power and control over his affair. But most among mankind know it not. And when Yusuf al-Islam attained his full manhood, we gave him power and knowledge. Thus do we reward those who do right. So a long period of time happened. And the Quran is saying, from the time he was bought, what happened was, his master didn't consider him like the usual slave. He really wanted to make his stay agreeable and comfortable. And he even said that maybe we might even adopt him as a son. And a lot of this has to do with Yusuf himself. I mean, Yusuf himself, he was a very beautiful young man. In fact, he was extremely beautiful, extremely handsome. And there's hadiths, or the sayings of the Prophet, where the Prophet says that God took half of the world's beauty and placed it in Yusuf and his mother. The other half he left for the world. This is how beautiful he was. But God says that when he attained his manhood, so through all the years that he was growing up in Egyptian society, and he must have been such a good person that God says, we rewarded that, his right conduct, with knowledge, power and knowledge. With power and knowledge. And apart from the fact that he was handsome, extremely so, he had this power about his personality. And he had this knowledge that he can tell you anything about life. And these two things, I am without doubt, made him extremely, even more so attractive. And this is what happens. The Quran says, but she in whose house he was, of course this is referring now to Zuleika, the man's wife who had bought him and brought him into his home, right? His wife Zuleika. Zuleika was pretty, she was young, she was the wife of a noble person who was the governor of Egypt. She had a lot of power, and Yusuf was her personal servant. At some point, though, as he got older and became a man now, he became too irresistible. Not to mention was fine. So the Quran says, but she sought to seduce him from his true self. And one day she called him into her room, and she fastened the door, and she said, "Now come, thou dear one." What? He's like, what? He said, "Allah forbid, truly thy husband is my Lord, or my master. He made my stay here agreeable. Truly no good comes to those who do wrong." So she was ready to be intimate with him, and she wanted to seduce him, and he was like, what? He's like, you expect me to betray your husband when he has treated me so gracefully? Even after all these years, this is what you want me to do? This is not to mention the act itself is, unless he's married to her in Islam, this is forbidden. Fornication is forbidden. Sleeping with another woman outside the context of marriage is a no-no. We don't do that as Muslims. The Quran says, and with passion did she desire him, and he would have desired her, but that he saw the evidence of his Lord. Thus did we order that we might turn away from him all evil and shameful deeds, for he was one of our servants, sincere and purified. For he was one of our servants, sincere and purified. So this thing, this attraction, this passion, this beautiful woman wanting him, God says he would have desired it. He would have desired her. But what stopped him was a few things. One was, well, to start off, he was sincere. And because of his sincerity, his sincerity in the worship of God, in the obedience of God, God had through the years blessed him with this purity. Which is typically the character trait of the best examples in the religion. And I'm not just talking about the religion of Islam as what we refer to Islam today. No. Even in Christianity and in Judaism, all of God's prophets through these faiths, although currently today, if you look at those texts, they often portray the prophets in a very bad light. And this is what the teachings of the Quran sought it rediverted, or it corrected that perception, because that was never really the true perception of prophets. God's prophets don't behave like that. This is why God says it was shameful. It was an evil and shameful thing, and God prophets, it's not for them. But oftentimes in Christian and even in the old Bible, we see that prophets behave in certain ways that's just like, what? This is shameful. Like, why would you behave that way? And we will learn about that as well. And so God said that because of this sincerity and this purity about him that eventually developed about his character, God said that he showed him what it was in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, what she was inviting him to. He saw it. And he was like, what? This is the mercy of God. This was the mercy of God on him. And this ability of God to show his creatures, not just prophets, but to show his creatures, whether one party removed through the story like this, or directly where God would show you, hey, look, that's what you're getting into. Be careful. And this is not something that is restricted to just prophets. I have, and I'm sure you have, where you have been in a relationship or about to, or some event or something you're concerned about, some decision you want to make, and you wake up out of this dream and you're like, you saw in this dream as if it was answering you about something you were thinking about and concerned about. It showed you this is what it is. I don't know how God showed him. It might have been through a dream. It might have just been some other way. I don't know. But God said we showed him that. And I have also in my own personal life where I was getting into certain things and I saw in my dreams where this was headed. And I had to back off. And so God said that we showed him this thing. We showed him what that looks like in the hereafter. In other words, God is showing us that our actions have a spiritual component. It creates a spiritual environment in the next world, and we don't know what that is until we die and we wake up into that reality. We're like, holy smokes! This is why in the Quran, God tells the believers that do not backbite. And the reason why he says that, he says, does any one of you want to eat the dead flesh of your brother and sister? Think about that. God is telling you that this is what you're doing in the hereafter. When you backbite, when you speak disparagingly about someone to someone else behind that person's back. Because in the hereafter, that's what you're actually doing. When you're actually talking, this is what you're doing. You're creating a spiritual environment in which you're actually doing that. And when you die and you wake up into the reality of life, of what you were doing, this is what you will be doing in that hereafter. You wonder, I don't have any control of this. Well, this is what you were doing in the life before. So when God showed him this thing, whatever it was, he was like, what? He couldn't believe it. And God says in the Quran that on the day of judgment, that when the people who were not guarding themselves from evil actions and behaviors and thoughts, God says when they see the nature of that behavior, God says when they see the evil of that, God says they will wish that there was a distance between them as that of the east and west is from each other. It's not something you want. You will wish there was that much distance. And this is another reason why God says they sold him for a few dirhams. They didn't even know who he was. This message that he had was so important. And when they get there, they're going to wish. They're going to wish. Because he was there to teach them and to show them that, there's certain things you don't. This is the way God wants you to be. He was about to teach them. God refers to the Prophet Muhammad, who brings the religion of Islam, as a mercy. He describes that what he does for his community is that he teaches them and he purifies them through this teaching of the Quran, this message that he came with. It was to protect them from, to guard them from a reality that they would not otherwise be aware of. That they can't, because they can't see that reality as clearly as God's prophets did. And so the prophets were there to show them, thou shalt not fornicate, thou shalt not sleep with another man's wife, thou shalt not commit adultery, whatever the do's and the don'ts. You should not eat certain foods because they are And we will get more into all that, but that's an aside. So now when Yusuf saw that there was no change in her mind, the Quran said that they both raced each other to the door. And she tore his and she grabbed on his shirt from behind. And when they both found her, but as this happened, when they got to the door, her husband opened up the door and walked into the room. And they were both there. And he was like, what's going on here? Immediately, bro. Immediately, guys. She said, what is the fitting punishment for one who formed an evil design against thy wife but prison, or a grievous chastisement? So all of a sudden there's no love or passion there now. She sought to protect herself now. The husband is there. This is the two-time-ish nature of a human being. One moment they love you, next moment they're ready to cast you in prison, to leave you to hang to dry, right? Right? Yeah. So he said, it was she that sought to seduce me from my true self, and one of her. And so the husband, it seemed that he was a fair enough person, maybe not, I don't know, but he was like, what? She's saying one thing, he's saying another. Who do I believe? So he turns to one of the servants that was in the room. He says, what's going on? And so the servant says, well, if it be that, and he says this in a roundabout way without actually saying what he really thinks, but he says it in a roundabout way, very clever way. I don't know if it's a he or she, but they responded basically, well, if it be that his shirt is rent from the front, then is her tale true, and he is a liar. But if it be that his shirt is torn from the back, then is she the liar, and he is telling the truth. So when the husband looked at his shirt, he saw that the shirt had been torn from behind, because when they were racing to the door, she wanted to stop him from getting there and getting out. So she raced behind him and pulled his shirt, and it tore. Subhanallah. All praise be to God. That's what that means. All praise be to God. Oh. So the husband was like, he said, it's a snare of you women. Truly great is your snare or your trap. He said, oh, Joseph al-Islam or Yusuf al-Islam, pass this over, turn a blind eye, basically. Turn a blind eye to this, please. He says, oh wife, ask for forgiveness for your sin, for truly thou art at fault. And it must have been a very humiliating thing for him, because here he is, this woman, his wife, is trying to seduce the slave. I bought this guy, and I gave him everything. And you're trying to, what? But the character and beauty of Yusuf was incontestable. Slave or no slave. But it must have been difficult for him as a man. And as a man myself, I understand that. Much less for people who are married. Men among the men who are married, they understand that she's doing what? That's humiliating. Anyhow, excuse me. So what happened was, rumors spread throughout the city that the wife of the great governor Aziz is seeking to seduce her slave from his true self. And the Quran says that the ladies of the city, the noble ladies of the city, started to spread this rumor. And they said, truly hath he inspired her with violent love, and we see she is evidently going astray. Quran says, but when Zuleika heard their malicious talk, this rumor, she sent for them and she prepared a banquet for them. She gave each of them a knife, and she said to Yusuf, come out before them. So let's backtrack a little. She was disappointed, she was upset, like what? So she said, okay, you want to talk like this? Well, okay. She concocted this plan. Quran said she invited the women, prepared a banquet of food for them with fruits and all that stuff, and just as they were about to take the knife, probably as a customary way of eating fruit, and they're about to peel their fruit, she called out Yusuf. She said, come. She was clever. You can see the level of her cleverness. She was an effective woman. And the Quran says that when these women saw him, they did extol him, and in their amazement, they cut their hands. They cut their hands. And in the process, they said, "Oh, God, preserve us. No mortal is this. This is none other than a noble angel." Subhanallah. Glory and praise be to God. They couldn't believe how handsome he was. They couldn't believe it. They were amazed. They had no idea. And in their amazement, cut their hands, bro. Forgive me for saying bro, it's just something I comes out every now and then. Forgive me. But I mean that in a masculine and feminine sense. So, and she said, Zuleika said to them, she said, "There before you is the man about whom you did blame me. I did seek to seduce him from his true self, but he did firmly save himself guiltless." So she has made her point. She has made her point. And the point is, she's trying to show them, yeah, it's easy for you guys to talk and spread rumors about me wanting to do this and that, but you guys don't have to live with him every day. You don't have to do that. I do. And this is indeed a lesson for us, is that, they often say that don't judge a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. They spent 1 hour or less with Yusuf, or just a moment with him, and they cut their hands. And Zuleika has to live with this guy every day, and he happens to be even a personal servant of hers. So she's basically saying, don't try to judge me. Basically, you're not in the position to judge me. So she made her point, and then she said, "And now, if he does not do my bidding, I shall certainly cast him into the prison. And what is more, he will be in the company of the vilest." This is the nature of the prison, The people that are there are considered the meanest people you can find in the society. And it is typically the case even today in, today's prison. I'm not saying that everyone who is incarcerated they're there justifiably, but typically the environment of a prison is a very violent one. It's not a place you want to be. To make a long story short, no one wants to be in prison. Apart from the fact that no one wants to lose their freedom, but just even that environment is. And we're talking about prisons in the modern day, but what of prisons in those times when you didn't have even all the luxury that people have in prisons today, if you want to call those things luxury? Your own cell, you may have maybe another person in your cell with you, but there I'm sure the conditions were just deplorable and miserable. And Yusuf said, in response to her, he turned and prayed. He said, "Oh my Lord, the prison is more to my liking than that to which they invite me to." Now it's not just her now, it's they. Than that to which they invite me to. So there is this sense that these noble women wanted a peace. He says, "Oh my Lord, unless thou turn away their snare from me, I should in my youthful folly feel inclined towards them and join the ranks of the ignorant." And this is an interesting statement, because what he's saying is that the people who fall into the trap of this sort of behavior, to be, to sleep around with another man's wife or other women that he's not married to, he says that this type of behavior only someone who does not understand its consequence would do. And that's where he says, lest I join the ranks of people who are ignorant, who are not aware of the spiritual consequences. Is really what he's saying. He says, I seek refuge from that. In fact, he seeks refuge from it so much, he's even saying, he says, oh my Lord, the prison is more inviting to me than that. That what God showed him when he saw that punishment, what it looked like, what the evil of that action, he said, nah, the prison is more. The prison is more of a palace than that, the consequence of that. And this is, for Muslims, a great blessing to know, because we live in a society today where in just about every TV show they show us, there's some kind of sexual vulgarity. People sleeping with other people's wives, husbands, fornication. People no longer have a sense of the integrity of marriage and the dignity of marriage. People today have even gone so far as to denounce the institution of marriage. And yet that is the only institution that God has left his favor with. He says that this is for you. This is for the believing servant, marriage. That any intimacy outside of that is not of this religion. It's not of Islam. That's un-Islamic. That's not of my servants. And even in the Torah and in the Bible, this was also the case. And there are some Christians who still to this day practice that. They will not be in any intimate relationship with someone who they are not married to. And I have met these people. And they are beautiful people. They are sincere people. They are people who are struggling to be pure and righteous. They understand that part of the message very well. And I commend them, and I continue to encourage them, because the mainstream, what is in our mainstream society, has gone counterproductive to that. They've lost the message. So when he finished prayed, Allah says, well, so his Lord hearkened to him in his prayer and turned away from him their trap, their snare. Verily, he heareth and knoweth all things. God said, Yusuf, got you. Don't worry. So the Quran says, then it occurred to the men, the noble men in that society, after they had seen the signs, that it was best to imprison him for a while. Things just got uncontrollable. All their women, bro, was trying to they couldn't handle Yusuf anymore. There was too much for him. They didn't know what they were. I can only imagine how they all wanted him, bro. And the rumors and the confusion and all this, just So it's the guys, men, they're just like, you know what, bro, we just gotta just lock this guy up, bro. Just that's how they dealt with it. They didn't care to deal with it in any other just manner. They didn't care about justice. So just lock him up. He's a slave, you know. Get these women to settle down, you know. And they put him in prison. Wow. Wow. Okay. Now, Yusuf is in prison, and he gets there, and at some point, I guess, he's approached by two men, and they tell him, like they realize that he has this ability to interpret dreams. By now, you know, he's a grown, and I'm sure there's many encounters where he has helped people, and I guess they found out somehow, or who knows, or maybe even in the prison he somehow did that and they were impressed, but then they came to him in confidence. They realized that this guy, they said, one of them said, I see myself in a dream pressing wine. The other one said, I see myself in a dream carrying bread on my head, and birds are eaten from it. So they came to him wanting to know what this meant, what these dreams meant, what these visions meant. And they were confident that he knew this. He knew how to do that. So it's very clear. But he before he goes in to tell them what they are, he says, you know, he basically says, you know, he disclosed to them his faith. In other words, he's trying to let them know that, look, this is really a gift that was given to me by my Lord. My Lord had taught me this. So he's trying to tell them that this gift that will benefit you comes from God. In other words, he's trying to admit to them, this is not something that I'm doing. This is something that God has done for me, through me. One way of proving to them his prophecy and that this is a sign, that this would be a sign to them that he is truly God's prophet. And in also doing that, he professes to them this his prophethood in the belief, in his what his religion is, basically. And he says to them, I assure you, I have abandoned the ways of a people that believe not in Allah or God, and that even deny the hereafter. And this is interesting because although my intention is to reveal to people the light of Islam through these stories and in everything that I will do through my videos, the real purpose of the message, the real purpose of my intention is really, it's the love. It's because I wish really to remind people of this day. This is the most important day of your life. It's like no other day. In the history of your life, there will be this day was not like no other day. And he says, you know, he brings up the hereafter. And what he's really referring to is the day of judgment and the life that follows after that, be it good or bad. He says, I have abandoned, I've disassociated myself from people who don't believe in God and don't believe in the hereafter or in the day of judgment or in the life to come. He says that is the most, he disassociates himself from that. He says that is not of me. And there's a reason why he's doing that, because he's saying, in other words, he's saying for people who really believe in God, or who ought to believe in a higher power, you need to be focused on that. Don't ever deny God, and don't ever deny that day or the hereafter. Because to deny the hereafter is really to deny God. Because if you don't believe in a hereafter, then you can't believe in a God. Because and to believe in a hereafter is to have a sense of a creator or something higher than yourself. Anyway, I don't want to focus too much on that, but just to move on, he says to them, and I follow the ways of my fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob al-Islam, and never could we attribute or assign any partners whatsoever to Allah. And he says that this non-attribution, this perfect belief in that there's only one God, only one power, only one authority. He says, and that comes of the grace of Allah to us and to mankind, yet most men are not grateful. He says that belief in one God, he says that is a grace. To have been introduced to that truth, he says that is the grace. And we will talk about why that is such a grace. He says this monotheistic faith is a grace. And of course, when we will go back to the history of Abraham, we will understand the monotheism that is really highly stressed, not just in Islam in general, but even in the story of Abraham in particular. He sought to find out who God was, and he kept, Abraham kept saying, is this my Lord? Is that my Lord? He's looking at the planets and the celestial bodies, and when he saw them changing and setting, he's like, oh no, that can't be my Lord. That set, that faded. And really what he was really getting at the heart of is this saying that the Quran says about God. God says that everything is perishing except the face of God. Everything. Every idea, every thought, every speech, every person ages and gets young and ages. Every time itself fades and passes. The rocks, the mountains, they change. Everything is fading. Everything is perishing. The earth, the sun too has a lifespan that will burn out. Everything. It's just a matter of time. And God says everything in creation is perishing, is fading, except his face. So when Abraham was looking at the stars and the sun and the moon, and he was saying, is this my Lord? He wanted to worship God, and he wanted to know what is the Godhead, the true deity of divinity. And he couldn't find it. He couldn't accept that this thing that would burn so bright would then eventually disappear in the sky. He says, no, that's not my Lord. He understood fundamentally that the Godhead was something that is perish, dying. God says that God does not need sleep. God does not need to eat. To sleep admits defeat. Because if you don't sleep, you're going to flip and burn out. You're going to start getting all sorts of diseases and mental complications and physical exhaustion, and you eventually die. Just from a lack of sleep. God says God does not sleep. If you don't eat a couple of days, you can't even walk about with any kind of real energy. You can't even go to the gym. God says I don't eat. Not for me. What? So he's really saying that to understand this true God, this one God that is so, his real place in creation. His real place in creation is there's nothing like him. He is the only thing that does not perish or fade. And there's nothing like that. In all of creation, there's nothing like that. There isn't a second one like that. There isn't a first and a third or a second or no. There was just him. Everything else. God says that everything in creation must come as a servant before him. Everything. Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Abraham, Prophet Jesus, everybody. There's nothing that is above him, or no, that's not the Godhead. And Yusuf is trying to say this is what the Godhead is. It's one. It's not 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. It's not just one. And so he says, "Oh my two companions, are many masters different among themselves better, or one God, the one supreme and irresistible?" So here it is, Yusuf is trying to teach them the religion, the monotheistic faith of Abraham. And he's trying to show them, look. And he's asking them, he says, if you had more than one masters, and each had a different idea of what to do or how they want you to do something, you would be, what would be your condition? Your condition would be one of confusion. You have one master telling you this, another master telling you the opposite. Another one wants you to go here, while another one wants you not to go there. He wants you to be there at this time. He says, is that better, or one master? If you had one master, and you were in a relationship with that one master, and he was telling you, or she was telling you what to do, where to go, you would know that this is one instruction. You didn't have 10 or 5 instructions competing with each other. He says, and this was the point he was trying to make about God in the place of creation. There's only one God. There's only one religion. There's only one instruction for humanity. That's it. So instead of him just jumping into interpreting their dreams for them, he wanted to just give them the teachings of the faith that he belonged to, and it was important to him. And when he had finished saying all that he wanted to say, he said to them, "O my two companions, as to one of you, he will pour out the wine for the king to drink." In other words, that this person would become, he would be hired by the king of that society eventually, and he would become the wine pourer of the king. What an interesting position. The king wouldn't even raise his... King was so powerful, he wouldn't even raise his own hand to pour his own drink. He hired somebody for that. Anyways, it's funny when you think about it. But this was the power. This is the kind of power these people had, and wealth these people had. And as for the other person, he says, and as for the other person, he says, he will hang from the cross and the birds will eat from his head. So it turns out that the bread that the bird was eating from was actually his head. So the Quran says, and of the two of them, to the one whom he considered about to be saved, he said to him, mention me to thy Lord, or mention me to the king. So Yusuf was saying to the man, when you get there, when you're hired, just mention me to the king. Help me. Give me, relay my case to the king. Perhaps I guess he was hoping that perhaps the king will be able to help him out of his condition. And of course, it's understandable. He was unjustifiably imprisoned. And I guess the king was like, the last appeal, today, like when you go into court and you plead your case and you get your trial and you get a verdict that you feel is unjustifiably so the case, you if you have the money, you try to appeal your case to the highest court of the land. And in some ways, in some sense, this is exactly what Yusuf was doing. He was saying, look, maybe the king can help me. He is the highest authority in the land, and I was unjustifiably imprisoned, and rightly so. But God wanted to teach us a lesson, and the lesson was, God wanted to show us, don't ever depend on anybody. Literally, not for anything. And this lesson is the hardest lesson. The hardest lesson. Even the prophets slipped up a little on that one. And we see it here in the story. And Lord knows I am not a saint, and I am guilty of this, and many of us are, of hoping and relying and depending and expecting from others to help us, sometimes in small ways and sometimes in big ways. But God wishes to teach us in this story that no, God is there for you. That if God wants to help you, He will help you. And He's showing us in this story how He was helping Yusuf al-Islam. And that Yusuf, he asked for help, and he should not have asked for help. Not that it was a sin of him asking, but that he didn't even need to, because God can help him. God wants to show us he didn't even need to. God can help him. And when God wanted to help him, God helped him. In fact, we see that God helps even the man to remember to help him, because God said that when He said that to the man, God said that, but Shaitan made the man forget to mention him to the king. And God says in the Quran that, and Yusuf al-Islam lingered in prison a few more years. Imagine that. Imagine that. Somebody that you met, a beautiful person, a prophet of God, prophesied and told you that you will one day be hired by the king and you will pour wine. And that day happened, and you became the wine pourer. And you never even remembered the person who prophesied that and told you that many years ago? God said that He forgot about Yusuf al-Islam. He completely forgot. This is how forgetful and this is how undependable people can be. That you can give them and do for them and show them everything and help them in every way, and they would still not be able to help you. This is the level of the human condition. And God wished to show us in this story, not just Muslims, but people who believe in a higher power than themselves. The energy and the force and the power that created everything. God can do that for you, not a problem. How you think you even got here? Who did that? You think God can't get you out of prison? So God said he lingered in prison a few more years on account of the man's forgetfulness. God said, okay, get you out. I'll get you out. It's time. And this is what God shows us in the story, that I'll take care of the situation himself. One day, God said that one day the king woke up from a dream. And it's interesting that it's not anybody else that woke up from a dream. It's the king. What's the odds of that? The very person he was trying to get him to come out of the prison, to get him and help him out of prison. God says, now I will help you. The man had his moment. He forgot about you. I'm going to show you how I can help you. And this is the point of the story. God is trying to show us. Don't ask from anybody. In fact, Abraham, his great-grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad said that the thing that God loved most about his grandfather, Abraham, was that Abraham never asked anything of anybody. He never once asked anything. He never relied and hoped or hoped in anything other than God. If there was anything Abraham wanted, he always asked Allah first. And when they asked the Prophet, why was Abraham so loved? Why was Abraham the friend of God? The Prophet said, Prophet Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, he said, because the trait of Abraham was that he always asked and relied on God only, and God made him his friend. That God was so happy to find in his creature someone who didn't rely on anybody but him. That his belief in God was so perfect. So perfect. It was so perfect that when they sought to burn him in the furnace, or in the they basically set this big fire for Abraham, and they were going to throw him in there, and they did. God said, fire be cool for Abraham. What? That's my friend. You can't burn him with my fire. You can't do that. And I know for some of you guys, you'd be like, this is just stories, these there, whatever. But my point is, no, they're not just stories. They are the stories of faith. They are the stories of people who demonstrated so much faith in the Creator that the Creator couldn't help but behave in this way with them. That God is not, and God always says this, we do not suffer the rewards of a people who are sincere and who do good. We don't turn our backs against that. We in turn and we act in favor. We give them the best. We would even if it meant saying to the fire, be cool for Abraham. Some people will argue, oh well, among the believers, people who believe, among Muslims and Christians and Jews, people who actually believe that these things, yes, did occur, they would argue that, oh yeah, it was because, this was God's prophet, and that's why God said that and protected them. And that's true. But that's not why God protected them. They earned that protection. This is why God says he was sincere. He was faithful. he attained the level of faith. He was purified. You don't treat someone who's purified other than like that. And we will get into miracles and talk a little bit about all that stuff. That's a bit of an aside, but just wanted to drive home that point. These are not just fantasy stories. These are things that really happened and could happen still. When the level of one's faith and sincerity is like that. And this is why I want to tell these stories, because I want to redivert the idea of what it really means to be a Muslim. And these are the best examples of that. They're the best. You can't find any better than these people. So one day the king woke up, and God says in the Quran, he said, I do see in a vision 7 fat cows whom 7 lean cows devour, and 7 green horns of... Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to continue this part of the story in a second video. So I'm gonna pause it for now. I have to take off and get some things done, but I'd like to continue in a second part with this story, and we'll finish the story. It's quite a lengthy story, so I want to be able to make sure that all the details are there, contextually speaking, and all that. So it does take a little bit of time, and I don't want to make too lengthy a video for you. You can take breaks and where the video cuts off and picks up back again. So God willing, I will sit down again and we will continue with the story, and hopefully we can continue to benefit from it, both yourself and myself, because these stories are not just something I share with others for talk. I learn myself even as I'm telling you the stories, and I remember these things, and it makes a deep impact on my own heart and in my own thinking and in my own psyche. So thank you for listening, and thank you for being here, and God willing, I will continue with the second half of the video, and I hope you can find some benefit from there as well. You have yourself a wonderful day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.